Hello, everyone. This is Bruce, and welcome to a special edition of Congress Weekly. This segment is titled, Are We on the Verge of a Civil War? My intent is to inform you with what I know and let you decide if anything is brewing within our country. Our military is the best in the world. I would never dispute that. We can fight any battle our enemies want to start, and we would be the ones finishing it. There is no military better than us to fight a conventional conflict or war. Here is where we run into an issue. What happens if a civil war were to start, if it hasn't already, on our own soil? Is this a possibility? Well, if you think not, why does the House of Representatives have a bill, which is House Resolution 350, entitled Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act of 2021, going through the process of getting approved? This bill establishes new requirements to expand the availability of information on domestic terrorism, as well as the relationship between domestic terrorism and hate crimes. It would authorize domestic terrorism components within the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, and the FBI to monitor, analyze, investigate, and prosecute domestic terrorism. Don't think for a minute that this activity isn't already taking place within these departments. This bill just packages it all together. So, what else is happening that would give me thoughts that a civil war could be in the works? First of all, look at all the rioting that is taking place in Portland, Oregon, and Seattle, Washington. This isn't just a couple-day event, it has been going on for months. And the events taking place there are only the tip of the iceberg. We just don't hear much about the issues happening in other cities at the moment, except for in Minnesota. And the violence has spread to Washington, D.C., New York, Philadelphia, and Chicago. The civil unrest that took place at our Capitol on January 6th could be just a precursor of more insurrection to come. Our southern borders have, for the most part, been opened up. We hear a lot about the children coming into the country, but only periodically hear about the gangs and terrorists crossing the border. The previous administration had policies in place to handle those wanting to enter our country. In addition, many miles of border wall were being built. To continue building the wall was paused on day one of our new administration. Based on the crisis occurring at the borders, there is now thought being given to continue building the wall. We might as well, since hundreds of miles of new wall that haven't been put in place have already been paid for by us. Plus, having the wall would funnel anyone wanting to enter our checkpoints, thus taking the burden off of the border from monitoring so many miles of open border. Keep in mind, the border is significant because of bad actors finding ways to enter. But this is only part of a much larger part of what could take place during a civil war. Keeping the bad actors out might help with slowing down a civil war, since they would most likely want to generate trouble, thus pulling federal, state, and law enforcement agencies away from the areas that they would normally patrol. Gun sales across the United States have been at an all-time high. Why? Because more people have taken an interest in target practice? I don't think so. Gun sales in March of 2021 was the second highest month on record for firearm sales. Some experts believe this is due to hearing about potential gun legislation being passed and due to more and more shootings taking place in a variety of locations throughout the United States. This could be part of the reason, but I believe there is more to it. Is there a silver lining anywhere to stop any potential civil war? Well, on the positive side, J.P. Morgan Chase CEO states with excess savings, new stimulus savings, a new potential infrastructure bill, and a successful vaccine could lead to prosperity by the year 2023. He goes on to say the United States should focus on improving wages for low skilled workers, training for jobs, making it easier for those with a criminal record to get a job, better fiscal and tax policy, reforming social safety net programs, and proper immigration policies. That isn't a perfect world. Here are some of the issues that he sees keeping us from reaching these aspirations: the pandemic, racial unrest, the rise of China, and I'll add my own comment here. If China takes over full control of Taiwan, we are in serious trouble. Taiwan is in a very strategic location off the coast of China, and not too far east of Taiwan is the Philippines. China is very interested in taking complete control of the South China Sea. In addition, Russia is becoming an issue with possible invasions of countries we support. So while we are possibly in the midst of a civil war, we have serious issues developing worldwide. It was also just mentioned that we plan to pull out all of our troops from Afghanistan. You could think this is a good thing, but the implications of what could happen down the road will most likely pull us right back in. What if a civil war did break out? When you think of a civil war, most of us think back to the day of how the Civil War was fought within the United States. To generalize it, it was the North against the South. You knew for the most part who the enemy was by the uniforms that were worn. This Civil War that I am talking about, if it truly grew, would be nothing like a civil war we think of from the past. We honestly would not know who the enemy was, and the people we would be concerned with would not just be Americans. Other countries have already said they have sleeper cells throughout our country. Put them in the mix, and we really have problems. You might think, well, certainly there has to be someone at the top from either side who is in charge of the uprising. Sorry, but that most likely will not be the scenario. And that is if there is only two sides. Then, who do you negotiate with to come up with an agreement to stop the fighting? Unfortunately, there is no easy answer. Would the National Guard step in at some point? If they did, we might look at even a greater problem. What about other nations? What if they want to start something with us? Other countries are keeping a close eye on us, and once they see an internal uprising occurring, they will try to take advantage of the situation. China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea are already constantly watching us, and these countries may be the instigators of an internal uprising. They would see us as weak and vulnerable. We could end up in a civil war and not know who the leaders are. We may find up hearing different people speak, and one who catches our attention the most might be someone who we end up standing beside. Edward Bernays said in his book Propaganda, and I quote, "Propaganda will never die out. Intelligent men and women must realize that propaganda is the modern instrument by which they can fight for productive ends and help bring order out of chaos," end quote. Or in my opinion, the other way around. Those of you that follow types of warfare might be thinking at this point, this so-called civil war could follow the form of a guerrilla warfare. You wouldn't be wrong thinking this way. It allows men and women more freedom than they would have in a regular army, and it would allow them to remain at home to defend their families and communities. This approach provides credence to the massive purchase of guns lately. Guerrilla fighters recruit from and receive supplies from the local population. But here is the issue. What are you fighting for besides protecting your family? Are you protecting your town or city? How do you know if your group of fighters agree with the ones in the next town? And let's not forget about several cities working on defunding the police. In my opinion, not a wise move. Some cities are now finding that out, and they are trying to budget the funds for the police. But without the number of police needed, crime has gone up enough to take notice. Could this be another reason more people are purchasing firearms? There are several extremist groups throughout the United States, some with familiar names, some not so familiar. To keep this edition within a reasonable time frame, I will only focus on just one group today. However, other groups will be covered in more detail in later videos. In fact, my next video will cover Proud Boys. But for this video, let's look at a well-known named group, Antifa. Not picking on them, just providing what I know since they are so popular. Antifa is not new. It is considered by some to be a violent extremist movement that started as a communist paramilitary group in Germany. It was around 1932 when the German Communist Party announced a new group called Anti-Fascist Action, which became known as Antifa. Their symbol on their flag is one red flag and one black flag, which stands for the union of communism and socialism. Antifa members, also known as Antifa militants, dress mostly in total black, but some wear red shirts and bandanas to show their allegiance to Marxism. Marxism, in basic terms, is a political and economic theory where a society has no classes. Every person within the society works for a common good. The class struggle is pretty much non-existent. Antifa quickly became known in the year 2019, mostly in Seattle, Washington, and Portland, Oregon. But events involving Antifa go back to at least 2015. And if we look further back, they were known as the Rose City Antifa in 2007. The mainstream media doesn't devote much time to this group. Some even deny they exist. This comes mostly from the left, but at this point it is uncertain why. As an example, one member of the House Committee in the House of Representatives called them imaginary. In other words, the product of imagination. Yet some accounts state the group is violent and seek to destabilize the United States through domestic terrorism. Others say they are brave heroes who defend their communities against white supremacists and fascists. And our new Attorney General, Merrick Garland, has stated he plans to focus on right-wing groups. Hopefully he is looking at all groups, since he said he is for all the people. If you think for a moment that Antifa is just a small-time group with no real purpose, you're extremely mistaken. They know how to use propaganda, violence when necessary, and even know how to intertwine in politics. They are very good with all aspects of logistics, from weapons to food. Social media is used quite effectively by them for members to spread what is going on real time. The platforms such as Reddit, Instagram, Snapchat, and Twitter are all used. You might think that they are for progressive Democrats, but they are not, nor do they favor people of color. Their focus is to create a new utopian society, or known as a classless, free society. This is where the issue lies, and why I mentioned earlier, how do you know who is in charge, and is it for the right reasons? Street violence is only one part of Antifa's planned revolt. A couple trademarks of Antifa is to break business windows, breach businesses, and set fires. It is an act of protest against capitalism, white supremacy, and the police. Several of the mainstream media do not classify this action as violent. In fact, they feel any physical violence by Antifa directed at their opponents is considered self-defense. No matter which groups you might read about, hear about, or follow, to stay ahead of the game, if you will, they will all want to monitor and spy against anyone they might think is against them. What this will turn into is you will not know who to trust. Someone who you think is your best friend might not be after all. This tactic certainly isn't new. It has been around for many years. So, that is my first take of a possible beginnings of a civil war. There are more politicians than you might realize who are supporters of either the far left or far right organizations, and they use their office as a springboard to help these organizations. There is a dark moon rising, and some events are occurring under the disguise of something completely different than what we are led to believe. As a side note, in my previous video, I mentioned having an infrastructure bill in the works could be a good thing. Now that I have read how very little in the bill actually covers infrastructure, my thoughts have changed. We need a bill that truly focuses on infrastructure. Well, thank you for watching. Until my next video, which will include some information about a far-right group, Proud Boys, and what they believe in, and I will continue with whether or not we are on the verge of a civil war. Until next time, please be safe.